Hello, science lovers and science enthusiasts. Welcome to the Stream Science Open Editorial. This is a chance for you to tell us your ideas for science show topics or science web topics that we can then, at the Stream, turn into shows for millions of people around the world to watch. And of course, that'll all come from your ideas. I know some of you are already joining us via our Twitter chat. You're using the hashtag StreamScience to send us your ideas and to send us guest ideas that you want to discuss science topics. And a couple of people are in our Hangout. And so in just a minute, I'm going to go around our virtual room and have them introduce themselves. But I just want to encourage all of you who are watching our Hangout now as it happens. My name is Malika Bilal. I'm joined by, of course, my co-host, Femi OK.
Hello, everybody.
And we will be listening for your ideas. We'll also be trolling Twitter at the same time, so we're multitasking. We'll be looking for your ideas there as well. So as you're watching on stream.aljazeera.com, you can, of course, tweet in your ideas using that hashtag StreamScience, and we'll pull them up into this show. So without further ado, let's get started. Phil, why don't you start us off with an intro?
Hi guys, my name is Phil Torres, and I'm a tropical entomologist, so I work with bugs in rainforests, but I also host Techno for Al Jazeera America.
Awesome. Welcome, Phil. Ian, no stranger to the stream. You're a former guest.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm Ian O'Neill, space producer for DiscoveryNews.com, and basically my daily work is to look at all the fascinating world of science and specifically space science. My background is a solar physicist, so if you have any questions about the sun, just ask me. But that's me.
I already have questions.
Yeah. Ian, why is it raining today in the UK? That is the question about the sun that I would like answered, because I'm at the Shard in London right now. What happened?
It's the same reason why I moved to California.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Why don't you introduce yourself? Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I am a PhD candidate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I am a biochemist/biophysicist. I actually study microbes and how they communicate.
Wow.
I do some really cool stuff.
That's cool.
I love that. I especially love when people who are doing cool stuff know that they're doing cool stuff and say that they're doing cool stuff. I feel like that's going to happen a lot in this hangout. Okay, last but not least, Renee, what cool stuff are you working on?
Hi, yeah, I'm a cosmologist. So I have the best job in the world. I study the universe, how it started, how it's changing with time, and how it's going to end. And I'm a TED Fellow, and I'm actually calling you from TED Women in Monterey, California.
Very cool. Awesome, and you guys got up early to join us in this hangout. So for those of you watching, how we're going to get this started is by going to our hangout and asking them what ideas they have that we could potentially turn into a show, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a time crunch. We're going to potentially turn this into a show in June, which is a week away. So we have a time crunch on ourselves, but that is when we're looking to turn around these ideas that you're having. So hangout guests, who's got a great idea?
You know, I think I'll get us started because so many of the tweets I got this morning about stream science ideas were ideas that I already had, which is basically about our diet and things like GMOs and chemicals and other parts of the human diet that won't either kill us or save us. And one of the big issues I see is this idea of scientific literacy in our diets. And it just seems like our findings of what is healthy and what is not healthy are kind of confusing, and a lot of times it's the science journalist's fault because they're not reported very well. And it just seems like the loudest voice or the best marketer ends up winning. So figuring out ways to, you know, just talk about these issues calmly and clearly, and just really getting to the bottom of what are GMOs, how can they be used, how are they different from Monsanto as a whole, and just labeling of ingredients in general.
You know, we actually got a tweet from someone named Ian, and he CC'd you, Phil, so it's great that you said that. How farmers choose and buy seeds, and so I'm going to pull that up now, and you'll see it on your screens there. And Ian says he wants to know just how little information is given by the simple GMO label. And I feel like a lot of people get scared when you hear GMO, at least here in the States. There's a chain called Chipotle, which all of us know. I had it last night for dinner. And one of the things that they're trying to push against is GMO free. That's one of the things they're pushing, and I think it contributes to a scaring kind of tactic that we all now want to stay away from GMO, but GMO doesn't necessarily have to be bad, right?
Phil,
Yes.
do you think we'd have to have Monsanto on the show to make it work?
Absolutely.
Because how do you get them to come on? Because they're so used to being pilloried. Like, what would you say to them, Phil?
We have talked to Monsanto on Techno, and we actually talked to them about another project that they're doing because they're getting so much backlash for GMOs that they're now approaching a bit more traditional ways of breeding seeds and things like that. So I think absolutely reaching out to them. But what's difficult with that is I found that anytime we report and give Monsanto's voice, the audience will oftentimes get angry about that. It's really important to define, okay, what is Monsanto? Some of their practices aren't necessarily the best, but they are not GMOs. GMOs are a completely different thing. They're being used in so many different ways. So there's some advocates out there who just truly believe in the future of this. And there's a guy at University of Florida, I believe his name is Kevin Folta, who's fantastic at this. He does amazing research with it, and is really showing that we can have better produce, we can feed people who are hungry around the world. There's medicines that can be made. There's so many incredible things that can be done. But we, of course, got to do it carefully.
I got a question about this because I too am a Chipotle fan. So whenever I go, they say no GMOs, all this, and I understand what they're getting at. But is there any solid research into GMOs being dangerous in any way? Because GMOs, as far as I'm concerned, have fed the world, and I'm more of an advocate than I'm not, but then again, I haven't really thought about the consequences of GMOs being something dangerous. I'm just wondering what kind of research is out there. Is it just fear-mongering, or is there actually some substantiality behind it?
I mean, I think there's been several reviews of just looking at every type of study ever as far as how it could affect human health, and there's just nothing there. There really isn't. As far as environmental consequences, there could be a few more questions there, but even so, people tend to be reasonably careful with how they apply. But yeah, human health, there's nothing to it. So when I see somebody like Chipotle do that, or I think Panera Bread also was starting to do that, I honestly think they're just doing it as a marketing tool, as a business decision. There's no sound scientific reasoning behind it. They're just trying to sell more burritos.
Sure.
But also, I mean, I understand the people are worried and scared, and they understand what's going in their diet. But if you think about modifying food, I mean, we've been genetically breeding foods for ages. I mean, when I moved to the US and the first time I saw a pluot or a plumquat, whatever, this hybrid breeding, I think a lot of the time it's just that it's a scary thing now, rather than thinking a lot of the food we're eating is like that anyway, and it's not bad because, this is just the way that we make food more sustainable.
And I think, too, when it comes to the question of farmers, we don't really talk a lot about the fact that there are big farmers and small farmers. There are differences in what people have access to in terms of seed and in terms of knowledge and understanding about what they're buying and planting and then turning around and selling. And I think that's another component to include in another piece of the story is particularly if you're a small farmer, what's to say that you don't just say, I need to plant corn this year, so I'm going to go buy corn seed and not worry about what kind of corn seed it is, just that it's affordable. And so we have to think, too, about resources and who are we buying our food from. Like, there are all of these questions that come to mind that I think relate to not just the hard sciences or the biomedical science behind diet and nutrition, but also the social science of it all.
I'm showing a tweet now. This is from David, who's listening to our conversation, and he says, what would need to happen if we do this on a show is we need to separate anti-Monsanto from the science of GMOs, and that kind of flows into exactly what you guys are saying. So we have to define those things also.
Yeah, I agree. Phil, do you think this is a debate kind of show, or do you think it's a sort of unpacking the myth about GMOs? Which way would you see it?
I've seen way too many debates about this that get heated and emotional. I want something that's cool, calm, and collected, just laying out the facts and just saying, okay, yes, these things aren't ideal. These are some other issues, the social issues. I love that aspect to it. And just kind of really just calmly talking about what are the facts here, what do we need to know, because the GMO labeling thing here in the U.S. is people don't really know what GMO means. I think there was another survey that they did that said if you want to label your food that has DNA in it, and a lot of people said yes, let's do that. and I also just saw some sunscreen that was being sold as chemical free, but they also on the same little circle said it has zinc oxide in it. And I'm just like, what do you think a chemical is? So just calmly talking about, taking these terms and really defining them clearly. I would love to see you guys do that.
Nice.
Yeah, I'd love to see a pure science one as well. I mean, I don't know if there's scope for that, but I'd love to know how these crops are actually engineered. How does it work? Because I spoke to at a conference. So I was speaking to a guy in industry, and he was very interested in space because they can grow certain food products in space, and it modified their genes, and then those genes, when brought back down to Earth, make them more resilient to, say, cold weather or droughts. And this is work that's actually being done right now, but there seems to be the stigma attached to modifying anything. And he's saying, well, it just makes it more resilient to cold. And we are genetically engineering it, but with the help of space technology to do this. And I would just love to know how that works, because that was a real wow moment. It was like, wow, you're using space to modify crops. Yeah. This is really cool.
Ian, do you think it's because we're just a bunch of scaredy cats? Do you think we as people around the world just get scared about anything that's vaguely scientific, the non-scientific people amongst us? Do you think it just makes us scared?
I think...
What was that face? What was going on there? Fear.
Well, I don't want to cut you off. I'll jump in afterwards.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no problem. No, drama. I'll hand straight over. No, I think it's very much like the flock instinct. You watch the news and you see something scary on CNN. It was like the whole anthrax delivery thing. I saw a CNN segment on it, and they tweeted this picture of the United States, and they coloured in red all the states where anthrax was being sent. They didn't actually cover the whole states with anthrax. I mean, this was a delivery problem, and it didn't infect half the United States. But I think there is this, fear instinct in us, and once you start, especially with social media now, I've been doomsday theories galore. Anything to do with space, asteroids are going to hit us. People get scared. It spreads like wildfire. Then scientists spend ages trying to calm people down. Keeps people like us in jobs, but it's ultimately, I just think humans are hardwired to follow the herd and get scared.
Yeah. Renee, you wanted to say something, and then I'm going to shift gears a little bit, so go ahead.
Sure. So one of the things that I just think is, it's very important to me, and I think it's we allow as the media, as a community of people, we allow ourselves to be bamboozled by science in the sense that people, at least when I interact with people enjoy or tend to say, oh, I don't understand that's too scientific, and then they just put that away. But you'd never say that about something else important in life, like music and art. And I think understanding and communicating that science is interesting and science is sometimes complicated, but if we follow the facts slowly, and this is why I like the suggestion of going through like what are the facts and what is the science, then we don't need to live in fear, because it's not as if someone is trying to sell you some crazy thing. We can understand the science, and it doesn't have to be that we just push it away and allow only scientists to talk about this and only use our emotions.
Right. Well, since we're talking about food, Chipotle, etc., I'm going to keep us on food, moving away from Chipotle. But this is a tweet that we got from our community. And Ian, I know this kind of speaks to something you're interested in. This is a tweet from Paulette. She's not the only one who tweeted this. She says, I would like to hear about either the retracted science paper or the fake chocolate study. Now, for those who are not in the know, those might seem like a strange combination of things, but let's focus on that fake chocolate study. This came out not too long ago. Ian, why don't you take it away?
Chocolate study?
Yes. So the chocolate study. Oh, I'm sorry, Phil.
It could be chocolate.
Ian's like,
I know nothing about chocolate.
Listen on, and you will know.
Yes. So basically, there was a guy out there, and I quickly saw the response go from praising to criticizing this guy. Just to preface it, where basically he did this fake study where he, basically made a very bad results that any critical eye would see that this was not a very well done study. But in the end, he said that people who ate chocolate once a day were healthier and it helped them lose weight. He did bad statistics. It was a poorly done experiment. Things that should have been picked up when he published it, but they weren't. So he kind of did it as a sting just to see, okay, what could he get published just because it was catchy and had to do with chocolate? Would it go? But then he pushed it a little further and actually went mainstream and global. And all of these papers started, newspapers everywhere, and it was in health magazines saying, this is why you should eat chocolate every day. Millions of people saw this. And then the guy comes out saying, I just kind of made it up just as a little test. So I think I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
This is interesting for me as someone who understands the difficulty in getting papers published, and it's something that I see often because most people who I know who are scientists, we sort of differentiate in our social media communities between what we call our Facebook groups and our Twitter groups. Facebook tends to be more like family oriented, people we went to high school with or went to college with, and nowadays, Twitter is such a fast turnaround. You can very quickly build a community of, other scientists or other STEM professionals. And so what's pretty interesting is if you go on Facebook and you look at the type of science or what's called science on Facebook, it's things that just face value make you cringe. Because in the byline, you can tell this is not good science. And I think, one thing that we need to begin to do is to be more relational. We separate ourselves as scientists from the broad public, and we're a part of the broad public. Laws impact us in similar ways. We still pay taxes. So, we need to begin to, I think, be more relational and interface more with the information that we get. And then I'll let someone else speak about the sensitive topic of.
Stephanie, I love the way that you said interface more.
I knew you'd pick up on that.
As you're trying to engage the general public in a non-scientific way.
I think it's very much possible because, if I don't know anyone else's sort of family stories, but when you go to a cookout in my family, people talk science. They talk about things that are related to science. And it's not difficult to sit down and talk about fact versus fiction in those conversations. And I think that if we can do that with our families and, with that uncle who's got a Corona in his hand, then we can do that, interfacing with everyday people all over the world. I think I think that the other part too is what qualifies as credible information is something that people really are not aware of, and we have to sort of begin to tear down that wall so that we can become more humanized and that people can know that they can trust us for the information that they get.
So, do you think the responsibility lies on the scientist or on the reporters?
Number one, when it comes to transmission of information, on the reporters. That's a huge component for me is going back and really checking on the information. And in the age of fast information, what you see is that information, you don't have fact checking anymore. You get a story, you want to put it out on Twitter within 2 seconds of hearing about it. Mm-hmm. So many times we see stories change because there's the initial of we want to be the first to come out. Like everybody wants to be TMZ, nowadays, and so they want to be the first to have that, to broadcast that story, but they don't have all the facts. That's very damaging when it comes to things related to health and diet, particularly, because people will turn around and go to the grocery store,
buy a bunch of chocolate.
Yeah, buy a bunch of chocolate.
So one of the TMZ, of course, for our international audience who may not know, I bet you do, it's an entertainment website that you can find online. There's also a television channel with all the celebrity news here in the U.S. But actually, Stephanie, I want to pick up on something that you said that kind of caught my ear. I mean, you said interfacing, and that's the thing I knew Femi would pick up on. But your point behind it was, how do you get science to interact with the everyday people whose lives science facts? And so I'm going to transition slightly to this tweet. This is from someone named Dandelion. Now, she's talking about an issue that is happening right now in Hawaii. Dandelion writes, this is video of a telescope impact on the summit of sacred Mauna Kea. And I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but this is out of Hawaii. And Renee, I know that this is something that you are interested in, and how science can impact the cultures and the communities from which these things are affected by.
Right, and so I mean, this is something that this issue is, it's really resonating throughout the astronomy community at the moment, both on Twitter, in the media, just in the kind of articles, and also on all our Facebook pages. And it's for me very interesting because, so the background is for some people that are catching up on this. There's a big proposed telescope called the 30-meter telescope, or TMT, which is proposed to be built on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. There are already quite a few telescopes there, and it's a beautiful site. It's good for science. The skies are pristine, and we've already done amazing science from the site, so it's really wonderful. But there have been recently some protests from native Hawaiians about the fact that they, the Mauna Kea is also a sacred site for them, and they feel in a sense marginalized, that their holy land is being used for science in a way that isn't respectful, and doesn't they feel that isn't a good thing. And it sparks a lot of debate because the 30-meter telescope consulted with many people locally for quite a few years during the sort of design phases, and some scientists say, we've consulted, we've done everything legally, isn't that enough? But at the same time, there's this really interesting discussion as to how do we address the fact that a lot of beautiful sites where science is done are often, or at least historically, have not been given the respect of the people who live there when the science, when astronomers, typically white astronomers, have come in and built telescopes and built facilities. And so it's really been sparking a debate about how do we understand the fact that there's the colonialization, in a sense, is embedded in some of our history. And as astronomers, we want to do good science that is good for humanity. And how do we address, looking inward as a community, the fact that our science may be impacting negatively on other communities? And so it's really been, for me, I think it's a very interesting story because it makes us look at ourselves and makes us look at a community, and it's highlighted the thought of how do we also address the fact that astronomy and science generally, but I'm focusing on my home territory, astronomy really doesn't have enough people of color in the field, and their journeys and lives within the astronomy community is often very difficult and very stressful. So it's all of these issues kind of linked together that have come up recently, and it's a difficult time for us, but I think it's something that the media should be interested in, because it's really getting to the heart of why and how we do the science that we do.
And I love this topic, and it's very near and dear to my heart because we often deal with the fact that we very rarely see what I call intersectional scientists. Where are the scientists that intersect, meaning that they come from communities that are impacted differently and at times positively and negatively, or just negatively, from some of the work that we do. Because we are missing those voices, we are missing, I think, direct means to connect two different sides and really understanding some of the culture, some of the history. Why is the skepticism there? That a scientist can address who came from a certain background, and the ability of that scientist to communicate back to that community, and not necessarily as a means to guide the community to the decision or to the side of science, but so that at the very least there's some understanding, and that scientist can also communicate some aspect of what that community is needing or wanting or desiring. I think this is just hugely important before we can really venture into opening up all of these science stories to the world. We really have to, like I said, build relationships between science and the various communities that are impacted.
This story really reminded me of, I'd spent about 2 years working in the Amazon on conservation projects, and every other project that I saw that failed, the reason they failed is because they didn't communicate well with the local community. The ones that were successful brought the community in from the beginning. They, taught people. They helped them be, trained them to be field hands and to learn how to be a biologist and things like that. So I think that embracing the community and finding their desires, like I've seen it in action work really well, and then I've seen the opposite when they don't bring in the community. That maybe they talked to the elders and got their permission, but there's a lot more to the community there that doesn't have a chance to give their voice, and then they end up getting kind of upset. So when I saw that, I thought it was really interesting. That I'm sure that might be one of the first times in your field, Renee, that this type of conflict has arisen. But I think it's a fascinating one.
So one of the reasons, I really loved what Stephanie was saying about how you also want to communicate with wherever your telescope is and the local people, but not always just to convince them to let you do your science. Like, you really want it to be inclusive. And I think the thing that scared me when I first came upon this is that as a scientist, as an astronomer, I had been largely ignorant of some of these historical challenges, because one of the issues with Hawaii is that while a lot of effort is being spent now to really engage with the community, historically that hasn't always been the case. And so there's like a leftover kind of mark of a lot of wounds that have been caused, and I was embarrassed that I didn't know about a lot of these. And so I think having these inclusive discussions about, first of all, who is doing the science. I'm from South Africa, and we have a lot of amazing facilities, and the South African government, has a process where they actually want to build resources and engage, so that if you want to work on one of the South African telescopes, you have to partner with South Africans, and it's a great way to build human capital. And I think these issues are important, rather than just saying, I'm getting my data, it's a space, it's completely removed from humans, and I'm just doing my science, realizing that, yeah, my science also affects the people around where the telescopes are, and also people who want to be scientists, we need to have a conversation. Yes.
I'm trying to make this into a show rather than an issue. So I'm trying to think of the conversation that we would have. Do you think the Hawaii telescope story is enough of a conversation to make that entire show about that? Or do you think you'd have to actually have a couple of different issues? Or do you think it's big enough in that community to highlight that particular story?
So one of the things that, it kind of wasn't clear in my preamble, but the Hawaii telescope is very important, but it also kicked off another thing, which I think is really linked to what Stephanie has already pitched and is discussing. When we were discussing this as a community, some people started saying things like, why are we still having these discussions, and isn't it over? And the discussion has become quite heated, and I think a lot of the people of color in the field start to feel like they're being marginalized, even if they're not Hawaiian, right? Because they want to talk about issues like race in astronomy, and people say, well, let's get back to the science. So in that sense, it's a springboard for how do we deal with these complicated issues.
Because I think you pitched two ideas. I think you pitched two shows. You've given us a twofer. You've given us the Hawaii story, but also that whole issue about race and minority communities in science and what that brings up. I think there are two shows, and I think to try and put them both into one show, I think there'd be elements. You can actually bring up the Hawaii telescope story in the race or diversity, and let's call it diversity and science, say, show, or in the diversity and science show, the Hawaii telescope story might actually be an element of that story. But I think they can actually stand alone, I think, right?
Great. And
it's your pitch. That's what I'm thinking.
What's there is a story about how we relate to the social justice issues, and we being those intersectional scientists, those scientists who come from underrepresented or underserved or disenfranchised or disinherited communities. How are we interfacing or how are we interpreting or interacting with social justice issues that come up in our communities, when our role in our job can often put us on the opposite side of the broad community, or can sort of cause us to feel detached from, if that makes sense. So sort of the notion that, for example, if I am a Hawaiian scientist, and what side do I stand on when I have a cultural understanding and a historical understanding, but then I also have my job and my expertise as a scientist.
I'm actually glad. Sorry, go ahead, Femi.
That's very hard for us to do as a half-hour conversation. That is like, where are we right now as a scientific community with diversity, and then where is our place in when we're talking about social justice? Can you give us another example about what you mean about social justice and scientists?
Well, okay, here's another part or a conversation that I've had. I've hosted these Twitter chats through this community I started called Black in STEM. And, for example, when there have been protests about killings and protests about political issues, and we're getting up and we're going to work every day, and in our very own country, people who look like us are enduring a lot to stand up for themselves and their communities. When we go to work every day and we work with proteins or we work with, telescopes, what is that, how is that impacting us in terms of how we contribute? Because value systems have been shown to be very important in how we choose to, what career to pursue, particularly after the PhD. And so how does that affect us on a day-to-day basis? I think it'd be a lot easier than you think to talk about that in a half an hour, because there are some very common experiences that people have.
So I don't know if anyone here follows Danielle Lee. She's a close friend of mine, and this kind of issue of social justice and also colonialization came up when we heard a lot of the discussion about colonizing Mars and going to space and this sort of American exceptionalism idea, and a lot of the narratives that we used were about colonialization. And Danielle and a couple of others that were listening to the talk with me once were like, hold on, can we discuss some of these narratives that are basically, there's quite a lot of racist language being used about space, and can we address this? And I think, these issues are super important, and we need to think about how we are having the discussions about science going forward, because they potentially marginalize people of color doing the science.
And online, our community is saying while people of color are marginalized, women are also marginalized, and that kind of sounds like what you were just alluding to there, Renee. So there's a tweet here that I'm showing from Maggie Hardy, and she's sending us an idea. She says, how about something on the Thank You STEM Women campaign started by this Twitter handle, StephEVZ43. Thank you, STEM. We have done a show, the stream has done a show in the past on women in STEM and some of the challenges they face. But I am interested to pick you all's brain on how you think we could further that conversation. Our conversation basically was about some of the everyday experiences, everyday discrimination that women face, and why there's a lack of women in that space. But is there someplace else to go? Because it's clearly something that still strikes a chord with a lot of people and they still want to talk about.
I actually have a huge, I'm sorry to jump in, so I'm super excited. So I think this is a story that it's about the media's portrayal of scientists. So it's like, it's you guys. So there was the backstory of this. There was an NPR interview with an astronomer, and he made a comment during the interview that, astronomy is just like boys with toys. And the interviewer didn't say, hey, don't you think that's kind of pushing the woman out of the field, and don't you think that's a bit of an insensitive thing to say? And when this went online, a whole bunch of us started tweeting with the hashtag Girls with Toys to show like, hey, we're here, we're female, we're scientists. And I think one of my issues is we have all these articles about women should lean in and they should push back in the community about not being marginalized, and yet the media is always portraying guys doing science and these exceptional characters, and then Marie Curie. Whereas we're like normal women doing science who are interesting and not these superheroes, and we're not talking about the fact that we do or do not have children, because that's one thing that we always want to talk about. Why do we need to discuss whether or not women are married, whether or not they're attractive? Can't we just talk about the science in the way that men never have to answer these questions? And I think a lot of the time journalists will write stories about how women need to help themselves in the field, and then continue to publish these really dumb stories about either male scientists being the only scientists or female scientists being like loving and caring and stuff.
So then, Renee, we shouldn't do a show about women scientists at all, right? We should just do a regular science show, happen to be amazing, phenomenal women scientists on just because they're there. We shouldn't necessarily stop a show, otherwise aren't we just feeding into, wow, you're a woman, that's amazing. Right?
Right.
So just forget it, move on, nothing to see here, just happens to be a woman.
So I definitely think we do need female role models. So I in a sense don't have a problem with saying, oh look, you're a female scientist, isn't that great? What I do have a problem is when a female scientist is interviewed and the journalist says, are you single, or someone said, "Oh, what did your parents think when you became a scientist?" Like they thought, "Cool, that's a job you can do." Like,
but I don't think it's just women scientists that have this issue, right? Because remember, there was during the Academy Awards, there was "Ask me more." Ask me more than my dress or how long it took me to get ready or whatever. I just think this is a general movement that you don't, just because you're a woman, it's not something special to be commented on. In fact, I think we should just ignore it. This is my perspective, because the stream is hosted by two women. We don't say, hey, we're two women every day we do a show. We just do the show. So maybe the way to do it in a streamy way is just to talk about the science, but make sure we've got a really diverse group of people talking about science,
but
like we have today.
There needs to be a change in media in general to make that happen, though. I feel. I mean, you can make it so discreet that you only have female presenters or female scientists on, but that I don't know if that would be across the board. That wouldn't be a ubiquitous thing. I think you need to make a statement to say, look, women are in very key roles in science, like in astronomy and space physics. There's so many women who are doing such incredible stuff in space, and for me, it's just natural just to cover that science because science is genderless.
Name three. Yeah, name three right now.
Sarah Horst, she's in JPL. We got I'm bad with names. This is really bad.
I put you on the spot there. I was just like, you're so ready.
Yeah, you just want to show me up, don't you? But I can't think of
No. I was hoping you might be able to just off the top of your tongue, because you said there was so many.
I'm not that good.
Well, that's all right.
That means in luck.
There are a number of Twitter lists.
Someone did tweet us with a list of names. There's actually a Storify online. We've shown that in the Hangout, and we'll tweet it out ourselves. A Storify with a list of women in STEM.
And I have tons of lists of women in STEM. Most of them are black women, but I have tons of lists. Like we're not lacking. I think the issue is, are you going out of your way to make sure that you are including women? That's number one. And then number two is, we need to have some statement shows. We need to yes, have women and feature women and black women and other less represented individuals being the experts, but we also need to have those shows where we have those conversations about what we deal with being at the intersection, being at the different intersections that we are, because I think that a lot gets left out that we need to be aware of, the broader community should be aware of.
So, going back, Ian, that's what you were saying. You say, like, you should draw attention to it rather than you shouldn't draw attention to it.
I think so.
Yeah, when it calls for it. I mean, my day to day. I mean, I'm very lucky in my field because, as I say, I see space science as being genderless, and there's a very good representation of females in science, especially in space science, and I try and represent that. But I wouldn't say it's like a thing I wake up in the morning and think, okay, I need to cover a certain number of women articles today because that's what I'm going to do. That's my purpose. But that's not it, because I find that certainly in my experience, this is a very small field. So in my particular field, especially in social circles, there's a good representation of women, and they're doing amazing science. So it's a no-brainer for me because science is science. In other fields, I would argue that it's probably harder, and perhaps you do need to make a bigger thing of it. And I would say that I've got a female science journalist, Irene, and she's been in the field for 30 years, and she likes to make a point, so saying, this is a female in science, and she's overcome a lot of pain and suffering to get where she is, just because she's a woman, and she should be celebrated for that. And I'm happy to do that because it's a male-dominated field. I mean, science is male-dominated, like many things in life. And I just think that if we can get a social change in science media to represent all sexes and all races the same, that'd be fantastic. But I just don't think that's realistic, not currently.
So, Steffi, I'm going to put you on the spot, like Femi put Ian on the spot. Can you give us some names of some black women in STEM who you would want to see have a conversation on television?
Yes. I love Monica Cox. She's at Purdue. We've all heard of Danielle Lee. She's been a TED Fellow. She's done some awesome work. Jedidah Eiler. She is amazing. She's an astrophysicist. I have tons of names.
Stephanie, I'm being a bit cheeky here because TV is the stream is a very chatty conversational show. So not only do they have to be brilliant at their work, they also have to be brilliant conversationalists, like you all are in the Hangout. So sometimes
They are.
being in science doesn't mean you're necessarily the best communicator. Are they like a
They're
double threat?
fantastic.
This is exactly why I'm thinking of people. These are the people who, you know, because I also host video.
I was just
chats,
vaguely
and
insulting just there, right? But in a positive way.
But you know, I understand the way that this works. You know, you want to produce the show, you want people to come back and watch the show again. If you hit on a good topic, you want it to be like, well, let's bring these people back to talk some more. And
can they make it exciting and draw you in?
I totally
Right,
believe
and women
so.
like Omo Shields too.
Yeah, I mean, these are women that I have seen. I mean, both Jadida and Danielle were TED Fellows this year, if that gives you any insight. And, you know, these are also people who, and I have a massive list of people in this way, but these are also people who, for me, you pick up the phone to have a 5-minute conversation with them and you end up talking for 2 hours. And not that you go on tangents, but it's just you're really engrossed in what you are talking about. You're really passionate. Your personalities, you feed off of each other, you laugh, you joke. So it becomes a really exciting experience. And these are also women who I've seen speak in some public arena where they have been able to really connect and contact the crowd and the audience. You know, there's not that wall that's there. And what I think about, you know, the way that you're talking and the way that you're interacting is you want to connect to people who are seeing this feed on their computers. You want it to be as if they're like right in front of you.
Yeah.
And I would definitely say that I've got a list of women who I think are phenomenal.
Yeah. We know where you live and we know where you work. So if you are wrong, we are going to track you down, Stephanie.
Or you could tell me to like come to London on vacation.
Monica's laughing because she's like, she's serious.
Serious.
She's coming to get you if you're wrong on these guest suggestions.
I have full faith in Stephanie. Because, one of the biggest topics that gets people, at least in our community, talking, and I don't think it's just our community, is space. And you probably knew I was going to say that because everyone has a question on it, everyone has an idea about it, and everyone thinks it is the future. So I'm pulling up this tweet here from Michael Hopper. He's a former Stream Team member, and he wants to know, from sun sails to Astro Robonaut, a stream science topic would be the future of space exploration. So Ian, this is what you do. What would you want to see?
In a show, I would love to celebrate space robots. I am a huge fan of space robots. I mean, not only because I'm a geek, but because they are changing the way we view the universe. So at the moment, one of my favorite stories at the moment is the New Horizons mission. And although it's getting coverage, it's certainly not getting the coverage it deserves because this thing's been flying through space for nearly 10 years. It got launched in 2006 and it's heading towards Pluto, the last of the classical planet, I say classical planets, to be explored by mankind. So, of course, back in 2006, we know that Pluto was demoted. And that was because of the discovery that the solar system is a bigger place than we previously believed. So there's a lot more smaller worlds beyond Pluto that are basically of similar size. So we've had to go back to the drawing board and said, okay, so we've got planets and we've got these things that are smaller than planets, but they're kind of planets, so we call them dwarf planets. So this happened with the discovery of dwarf planets in the outer solar system, as I said. So we've got this new classification, but there's no hope in hell that we can actually visit them certainly within the next few decades with our own eyes. So we actually have to send robots. So as I said, 10 years ago, New Horizons set off on this mission to the outer solar system, to the Kuiper Belt, where Pluto lives. And we are going to see Pluto up close for the first time in human history in July. So this is happening this year. And this comes hot on the tail of another robotic mission called Dawn, another NASA mission that went to the asteroid belt and is currently exploring Ceres, which is another dwarf planet. So we've reclassified these small worlds as dwarf planets, and this year we're actually getting our first look up close at these worlds. And they are fascinating places. But now through the eyes of these robotic explorers, we're actually seeing an incredible array of science, planetary science, is going on in our backyard. So we don't have to go to another star to do this. I mean, obviously we're doing some amazing stuff looking at exoplanets. basically worlds orbiting other stars, and that's what kind of gets all the press. But we've got robots all over the solar system. I mean, especially Mars. It's littered with these things. We've got Curiosity, we've got Opportunity
I love
roving
that
around on
quote.
the surface. Littered, yeah. And we've got an armada of orbiting space observatories around Mars, and all this is to try and understand where Mars came from, whether it can be habitable now, so if there's any bacterial life now, if there was any chance of life in the past, and if we can send humans there. So really, these robots are they are trailblazing where humans will eventually go, and I think that would make a fascinating show. Just the history of how this human ability to send these eyes and ears into space without actually risking human life to do it. So we're in this new age of robotic exploration. I just find that incredibly satisfying and very exciting. And some of the best science is coming from robots and not humans, and I just think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I mean,
it.
I've been fortunate enough to
it.
cover some of NASA's work at JPL, and the one thing that stands out, Ian, is how, like, the minds that it takes to get these things, like a 10-year journey to go towards Pluto. That just seems unbelievable when you watch the path of these things, because Pluto's spinning the whole time, and somehow you got to get this thing out there to intercept it right at the right time. And a lot of the astronomy people I'm following, they're tweeting out these images of Pluto right now that are just super grainy, but they're showing these comparisons of like a little less grainy now, and they're so excited about it. But yeah, you're right. I haven't seen the mainstream media pick up that, guys, we're about to see Pluto for the first time.
And this thing is extreme. I mean, like, so New Horizons is an example. This is just one of many missions. I mean, the historic Voyager mission, I mean, that's Voyager 1 has actually technically left the heliosphere. So basically, that's the sphere of influence of the sun, and now it's actually going into interstellar space. That is a mind-blowing thing, but, you know, it goes to show how big the solar system and the heliosphere is, because it's taken Voyager over 30 years to get there, well, maybe 40 years to get as far as it has. So we are trying to understand the scale of our cosmic neighborhood, and it's big. I mean, we live in this incredible spot in the galaxy where it just so happens life is possible. And every single space mission we send out there is basically just reaffirming our place in the galaxy and proving that we are in a very special place for some reason we don't know why. And that is one of the biggest questions on the minds of scientists, space scientists in particular, is why is there life on this planet? What makes us special? I mean, we know we orbit the Earth in a specific orbit, in a habitable zone that gives us life, allows us to have liquid water on the planet. But what makes us special? But these robots are doing their best to find out why. And as I say, we're going to be exploring Pluto. And that's not just to go to Pluto for Pluto's sake. We're actually going to understand the planetary dynamics of Pluto, why it's there, how it formed, to actually understand our place in the solar system. So space science is very inward-looking. Even though we're looking out all the time, we're trying to understand why we're here and what makes us important. And we're just very lucky we're in this almost crossroads of space science, where the technology is catching up with our intelligence, and that we can actually pose these questions and actually answer them using these complex telescopes, like the one that's being built in Hawaii, and these space missions that are currently flying out like a speeding bullet into the outer solar system.
Ian, so we picked a date in July. Is there like a sweet spot in terms of this is a great week to talk about it?
Yeah, it's like the first week of July. It's the flyby, and literally this thing's going to fly by like a bullet. It's not stopping.
Right.
this thing's going too fast. They can't slow it down. It's going like 750,000 miles per day. I mean, that's what 10 miles per second.
Wow!
That's how fast this thing's going. It's going, and you know, we're still communicating with it. We're controlling it. We can have little thrusters. It's a guided bullet going into the outer solar system. And we've been using Hubble to look at objects after Pluto that this thing could see, because, you know, if it survives the encounter, and there's a chance that it might not, it could hit something on the way through because it's going fast. So there's a lot of work underway to try and see if there's any debris in the way. So that's kind of like a very exciting adventure story in itself. The fact it's going to go flying like a speeding bullet through the Plutonian system, where we know there's smaller moons, and it could be even smaller moons and smaller debris that could penetrate it, so you don't want to think about that. But once it survives the encounter, it's going to go into the Kuiper Belt, and the Kuiper Belt, as I say, is filled with smaller planetary bodies, and they're currently identifying ones along the way, along this ballistic path that it's taking into the outer solar system, what other planetary bodies it can see. So Pluto's only the beginning. And all going well, if NASA missions are anything to go by, they seem to last an awful lot longer than they planned. So this thing could be another Voyager. It could be going into the outer solar system, leaving the solar system ultimately, because it's nuclear powered. So good on nuclear power
It's kind of
for
amazing
space travel.
do this, right? Like, don't you sometimes just think, like, how is it that we can put this in space and we've come so far, the technology has become so incredible, and the precision with which, you know, we can make these measurements, like the 7 minutes of terror when we were watching the Mars landing, that's
So good.
incredible. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's really
No,
great
this
to
is
be a
phenomenal.
human. Like, we're smart.
And the worst thing, and the most frustrating thing with the space reporter, because when I was in research, I was very, very focused on this one particular area, just coronal loops on the surface of the sun. But then when I became science media, suddenly I had this wonderful, all-encompassing view on all the space sciences going on. And probably the most frustrating thing for me is we have this amazing capability, if only we have enough money thrown at science. And the biggest issue I've got at the moment is space politics. I mean, it just depends on who's in power, depending on how much money NASA gets. And NASA's doing incredible stuff. I mean, obviously you've got other space agencies around the world, but really NASA's the trailblazer. But it's so completely driven by US politics, which doesn't represent mankind as a whole, which this should be. And often funding is cut. So like the planetary sciences budget, the very budget for these amazing space robots that go into these worlds is being slashed every year. And it's just like NASA's doing, I mean, it's not necessarily the most economic agency in the world. It's a government entity, so there's a lot of wastage in funds, but ultimately they get a tiny amount of money, say, compared with the defense budget, and that's just frustrating. It's just, and every year it just keeps on getting cut. So that's a whole different story, but I won't get into that. But that's probably a whole different story. Space politics.
Well, I actually think it's an important story too. I mean, the juxtaposition between science and policy it's interesting because, you know, the perception of the general public matters, especially in societies that are supposedly democratic, where we go out and where we vote and where we can write, you know, some representative government and say this is the way I think things should go. And, you know, people all over the world are looking at issues around science and science funding and saying, well, why does this matter versus, you know, some specific, you know, some other program or agency that's funding? Why is this important against, you know, versus defense funding? Why is this important versus funding for, you know, programming that?
Stephanie, what do you say when people say that to you?
Well, I think that they are, instead of issues that run perpendicular to each other, I think they're issues that run parallel to each other, and we're categorizing people just by our nature. It's funny, people don't consider themselves to be scientists, but we do a lot of evaluating and categorizing into groups, and we think that things have to be separate in order to understand them. And I don't think that's the case at all. Understanding what we are getting out of doing science is important, because there's science to treat diseases, and then there's science because there's the basis on just understanding the world around us and the space around us and the space that's way, way far away from us. And so
but I think
I just try to, go ahead. So I just try to show people that there are more parallels.
But I think this goes back to what you were saying earlier, actually, in terms of communicating, right? The reason why we want people to fund science is because the science is incredible and it's expanding our knowledge, but that also puts the onus on us to communicate better with the public and to do things like this, to get people to know about the science that matters, because otherwise, how do you expect someone to vote to give you more money from NASA if they don't care about what you do? So I think it all circles back to what you said before about making that interface between scientists and the public much stronger and realizing that we're part of the science thing together.
You know, I want to give us just a little roundup of some of the tweet ideas that have been coming in, because they've been coming in fast and furious. Some of them pick up on what you all sent us, but other ones are just random ideas that might be able to make good shows, might not. So I'm just going to read through 3 of them. This first one is from Aisha, and she wants us to follow up on Pakistan's fingerprint biometric database. And she wants to know, maybe we should slash biometrics in general. That's one idea. And after I go through all of these tweets, you all can tell me whether or not you think these could work as shows or not. The second one is from Joe Herr, and he says he'd like to see a show on my virtual brain or clone brain on the cloud, which will live forever. And that's an idea a couple of other people have sent us in, this idea of immortality in the sense that our brains are online in the cloud. It might sound difficult to your average person, but I know that we could probably break that down for a show. And this last one that I'll read is from Adisa, and she says, most people in developing countries depend on fish for their livelihood. How can we protect this resource? So bringing this down to a sustainability environment kind of conversation. Quick thoughts on all of them, rapid fire thoughts. Phil?
I love the cloud brain thing. I think that's fascinating, but I think you can encompass that into the real research that is being done. Google is funding a bunch of research on immortality, and just this idea of it's not just the science implications, but it's the social implications of what would that do to our Earth? You know, is it just the wealthy that are going to get the benefits of this kind of thing, or is this going to be universal? The Pakistan biometrics, I mean, that's something that we've had in the U.S. for a long time, and I think that that's something that we are kind of, I don't know if it's unfortunately used to at this point, that if you do these crimes, then your fingerprints will be stored in a database and that kind of thing, and facial recognition is becoming kind of universal. And what was the last one again?
The last one was on fish. That one you might have something to say about.
I love this fish. Because it's the one thing that we're eating that we're still like catching from the wild. You know, when it comes to cows or chickens, we've domesticated these things. We have farms. Fish farms aren't very efficient at this time, and there are some really promising projects out there that deserve to get the attention and get highlighted as the way forward for this very healthy protein.
And what I think is really cool about the fish story is one of my former research projects was on a virus that infected fish. And this was huge in that there was a major economic impact from this virus because it was salmon, and this is, you know, huge economic fish. And what's interesting for me thinking of this question too was that this virus could survive in different waterways. And you think about that, you think about how tiny a virus is and what it would mean that it could survive in these waterways, and something so minute and tiny, but then we have to argue about, you know, protecting the environment and throwing a large piece of plastic and oil spills when, you know, something, you know, the size of a micron can have that sort of impact. So I think it would be cool to sort of show the parallels both in terms of diseases and how they can propagate in these systems, but also, you know, on the other end here's the environmental impact that we're looking at. But that's just me. I think that's actually a pretty cool topic to really address from multiple tangents and approaches.
Stephanie, does climate change play a role with those viruses? Because I'm amazed. That's one topic we haven't talked about at all, is this climate change thing. But does that influence where these diseases propagate?
I'm not sure, but you know, I think that if I'm just, you know, trying to make an educated guess here, but if climate change impacts the life cycle of these fish, then it probably would impact the virus too, because if the fish are needed to be infected and then reproduce more virus, but the fish they're spawning at different rates, or they're not migrating as they normally would, then I think that would definitely all feed into each other.
See, I was trying not to mention climate change because, Phil, this is our Achilles heel on the stream. I'm a former meteorologist, and my thing was, climate change is so incredibly important, but how on earth do you make it engaging on television? And we've really struggled on the stream, and we was like, how do we do that? But I think that's probably a conversation for another day. It's not like we're ignoring it, but wow, is it hard?
But also, we're talking, I mean, the story about immortality, when people talk about like Google's working with immortality, and yet we in no way are trying to conserve a world in which that immortality would exist, right? Like, why does it matter if your brain's in the cloud if the Earth is on fire?
Well, I think with the immortality topic, it's interesting because what if Einstein was able to save all of his personal notes on the cloud? You know, instead of where would we be? Where would we be if Niels Bohr just could put everything that he was just thinking, all of his random thoughts, save them in his Dropbox. Where would we be in that sense? In the same way that, technology has allowed us to preserve memories of people and preserve information. Like when I think of immortality in the virtual space and in the digital space, I think of like, well, what can we preserve about the knowledge and information of people with access to this, and then sort of what are we dealing with, because legislation has not caught up to innovation in technology yet. It's almost like chasing a bullet on foot. So how do we really deal with all of this information and what it allows us to do, or all this technology and what it allows us to do?
Ian, you're the only one we haven't heard from, and your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think uploading your brain to the cloud, or immortality in computing. I think there's a misconception that in the future we're going to be able to somehow upload our brains and therefore upload our conscience to a computer network. And I think that there is ultimately going to be unless our technology completely changes, I doubt very much that's going to be possible. But it's certainly interesting to think, okay, at what point does a technology become so complex that it becomes indistinguishable from our brains? And that's fascinated me for a while. I went to a brain conference actually a couple of years ago, which was completely random for me. I'm space, so I don't do anything to do with biology, but actually it had more, I would say, it had more in common with a cosmology conference than I ever thought possible, because the complexities inside of the brain are ludicrously complex. So if you look at the Hubble Deep Field of all the galaxies in the distant past of the universe, it's almost as complex as that. And I was looking at this map of the brain. I was going, God, this has got way more in common with cosmology than I ever believed. So I was completely entranced with it. And really, the take-home message from that conference was that the brain is just a big mystery. We just don't really understand how it works. I mean, we understand the basic recipe for how thoughts are put together and how we function, but actually the nuts and bolts of it we don't really fully understand. So to try and convert that into a machine mind, I don't think that's going to happen, but I think machine minds are going to be, when they become complex enough, when we reach this alleged singularity or whatever it's going to be in the future, we're going to not really understand it as an intelligence in our sense. It's going to be intelligent in its own way. But then you say, how do you define life? Well, I don't know. That's going to be a big discussion.
This is really cool for me too, because like this is sort of the basis of my favorite comic right now, which is an image comic called Alex and Ada, and it really sort of touches on this from a science fiction perspective. But I think there's a lot of interesting conversation around it, because when we think about the computing ability of our brains versus just a computer, we're so far off. And I don't think in a million years we'd be dealing with the likelihood of whether or not we could just preserve our brains and download them, and so much so. And I think that it's much more a question of how do we utilize and preserve information in a way, and how do we access it in a way that it's beneficial for humans. It's almost scary, considering that I read comics. It's very scary.
All right, I'm going to end this with a tweet from our community before I go to Femi for her favorite pitch so far. So Femi, you can start thinking. I gave you a little bit of a heads up. But this is a great closing tweet from Natalie, who's been watching us over this past hour. And Natalie says something that is very interesting for us all to keep in mind as we try to turn these ideas into shows. She says science is about storytelling in a way that makes the public care and want to invest in curiosity. And that's what we're hoping we've gotten out of you over this past hour, and that we will get out of our shows and web content over the month of June. So Femi, did you have a favorite?
Actually, I'm just thinking purely practically for our show, what could we get out of Ian and Phil and Renee and Stephanie? Stephanie, I love the science and diversity. I think that is a great conversation to have, not had often or ever that I've seen. Renee, the telescope story is a great telescope story. It's local but also international as well. Phil, GMO, hello, got to do that. absolutely got to do that, and we will try not to have a row while we're doing it. We'll try and be cool and collected. I have a feeling, though, that our online community will be having the fierce debate while we're having the cool, calm debate. But we're going to try. We're going to try that one. And then, hello, Pluto. What? July. We've got to do that one, Ian. I love that story, and I don't think it's a story that's like right up there. And it'd be lovely to get a jump on that and
it's going to
do
take us
that
by
one.
surprise. It's going to
Yeah,
hit
so
us.
I've got like
It's gonna hit
4
us in the face.
shows. We drag 4 shows out of you, Hangout. We love that. Thank you. Thank you. Now I can go on holiday.
So thank you very much. As Femi mentioned, we did drag a lot of ideas out of you, but it was fun. It didn't feel like work. It didn't feel like school, and that is the beauty of it. Thank you also for our online community who was watching this hangout, and for those who joined in on the Twitter chat. Of course, you can keep your ideas coming with hashtag #StreamScience. You'll see all of them in a Storify up a little bit later. You can check our webpage for that, stream.aljazeera.com, and that's where you'll also find the broadcast of this hangout that we're doing right now. So keep your ideas coming. We're always on the lookout for them, and look out for our shows and web content coming up soon. Thanks so much.